Hello and welcome to today's English lesson. In today's lesson we're looking at adverbs of degree, fairly, quite and rather. Let's go to the intro. Now, as I said before, the focus of the lesson today is the adverbs of degree, fairly, quite and rather. And we're going to have a look at firstly fairly, secondly quite, and thirdly, we will have a look at rather. Now, the first thing I'm going to say is that all of these have fairly similar meanings. They're used to express degree and they modify adjectives and adverbs. These two here can also modify verbs, and I'll show you in a minute how we can do that as well. Now, the first one we're looking at is fairly. And fairly gives us the impression of a slight increase, okay? A slight increase. Basically, fairly, quite, and rather, the increase is gradual with fairly, more with quite, and then more with rather, okay? But we'll see through the examples how we can use these. Another thing that I'll point out is that sometimes when people are speaking English, they can stress or emphasize some of these adverbs and the meaning changes slightly. But today we're just going to look at the basic meanings, okay? Now, the first example that we have here, somebody asks you, how was your date? And you say, fairly good, fairly good. Not very good, not bad, fairly good. So you're more or less happy with the way that the date went, but you're not ecstatic. The second example is this one. Brian speaks Spanish fairly well. My friend Brian, he's been learning Spanish for a long time. He can't quite get to full perfection. He speaks it fairly well. Fairly well. He doesn't speak badly, but it's not that good either. So he speaks Spanish fairly well. Only joking, Brian, if you're watching, you speak great Spanish. The next example is Sam plays tennis fairly regularly. Fairly regularly. She doesn't play every day. She doesn't play 5 times a week. She might not even play every week, but she plays fairly regularly. 2 or 3 times a month, perhaps, okay? Fairly regularly. Now, the next one is quite, okay? Now, quite again can modify adjectives and adverbs, but the degree is a little bit higher or a little bit stronger. Let's have a look. Alan lives in France, so he speaks French quite well, okay? Because that experience of living in France and speaking French every day, which is what you have to do if you want to speak a language well, you have to live the language, speak the language. Alan speaks French quite well, okay? The next one, the test was quite difficult. It was quite difficult. It wasn't easy, it was quite difficult. I found it difficult. Now, we can say the test was quite difficult or it was a difficult test. We can use it both ways there, okay? And the third example, it's quite obvious she doesn't like you. It's quite obvious. It's more than obvious. It's clear that she doesn't like you. It's quite obvious, okay, that she doesn't like you. Now, this example here is different because it means totally. These two modify slightly the adverb or the adjective, but this sense here, it's quite obvious she doesn't like you means completely. It's totally obvious. It's blatantly obvious that she doesn't like you. So there's a slight change in meaning there with how we use quite. So be careful. And the third one, I quite enjoy working alone. Now here we're not using an adjective or an adverb. We're using a verb, which is perfectly okay. I quite like it. I quite enjoy working alone. So with quite with enjoy, like, etc., we can use those verbs. The third example is rather. Now, rather is the highest extreme when we're using these as an adverb of degree with adjectives or adverbs. And let's have a look. It's a rather boring movie. It's a rather boring movie. Now, I'll just point out something here. Now, fairly we normally use with favorable adverbs and adjectives, and rather normally with unfavorable adjectives and adverbs. Okay, so it's a rather boring movie. I don't recommend it. Rather boring. And the painting is rather ugly. But in this third example, we're using it with a positive adjective here. How was the play? Rather good, actually. Okay, so you're surprised. Okay, so in this sense here, rather means very. Okay, very good or rather good. You're surprised how good the film was. And again, in the last example, I rather like eating Chinese food, again with a verb. I rather like eating Chinese food. Okay, it's something that I enjoy doing. I rather like doing it. Okay, I rather like eating Chinese food. Now, thank you very much for watching. Remember to leave a comment below if you have any questions or any doubts. Remember to share on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Google+, or whatever social media platform you use. And I'll see you in the next lesson. Have a good day. Bye.